The Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm producer Amina Serna, filling in for Brian today. Good morning again, everyone. Now we turn to Brooklyn, where decades-old promise to build affordable housing is getting yet another makeover. If you're looking for an example of the city's failure to deliver on affordable housing, look no further than Atlantic Yards. Back in 2003, developers promised nearly 900 units of affordable housing by May of 2025. Yet, the rail yard between Atlantic Avenue and Pacific Street remains empty. In October, a new team of developers and the state's Economic Development Authority announced a new proposal meant to fulfill the promises of decades past and are looking for community input once again. While the new proposal is promising 3,600 more apartments than the original plan, they've also raised the income levels for apartments considered affordable. With me now to talk about the details of the new proposal and explain why this project has been breaking promises for 20 years is WNYC and Gothamist housing reporter David Brand. Hi, David.
Hey, Amina.
All right, start us off with what's in the new proposal. What did developers present to the public on Monday night?
So this is Atlantic Yards take 3, take 4. I don't know. There's been a lot of iterations of this plan over the past 20 plus years. But this latest version from this new development team that took over officially in October calls for a total of 9,000 units on this site. Right now there's about 3,200, so they want to add around 6,000 more apartments. They're going to do that in taller towers, including 2 proposed towers on the lots that catty corner to the Barclays Center, where there's right now a P.C. Richards & Sons and an old abandoned Modell's that's become a basketball training facility. So we could maybe expect to see 2 high-rises there. And they're going to make a percentage of those units affordable. It's not quite clear how many yet, but they are talking about the income levels in these new buildings, for the affordable housing in these new buildings being higher than the original proposal, as you mentioned. And so they're thinking like up to $147,000 for an individual, or $200,000 for a family of 3. So not for low-income New Yorkers, more for kind of like middle, moderate-income people. And
before we get into some more details, can you give us the backstory of the Atlantic Yards development project? How did we get to this point over 20 years?
Well, I think we can confidently say that this shows that things are often a lot more expensive and more complicated than initial plans would suggest. And so back in 2003, the developer Bruce Ratner and his company Ratner Forest City introduced this plan with backing from the state and the city. The state's Empire State Development Economic Development arm allowed them to bypass the typical land use review process through the city to accomplish this, and they would build more than a dozen buildings, apartments, and condos around this centerpiece, Barclays Center. Fast forward 22 years, the Barclays Center is there, about half of the buildings are there, but half of them are still missing. And we mentioned this has gone through different iterations. So Ratner got out in 2014, sold it to another China-based company called Greenland. Greenland later went bankrupt, and that's where we are now and why a lot of this hasn't been completed. Found out it was a lot more expensive, mostly when it comes to building a platform over the rail yards there between Atlantic Avenue and Pacific Street. 22 years later, there's still an open rail yard, no platform developed there, and that's why we don't have the housing.
Listeners, do we have any veterans of the Atlantic Yards battles of the early aughts tuning in? Any new residents of the downtown Brooklyn area? The state's Economic Development Authority and the developers are looking for community feedback on this proposal. So we'll open up the lines for your feedback here. Call or text us at 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. David, take us back in time to that 2014 agreement. What exactly did it require the developers to do?
Yeah, so right before Ratner got out of the deal and sold it to this company, Greenland, he had reached a binding legal agreement with a community groups in the area called Brooklyn Speaks, and this was also signed by the state, where everyone was frustrated. It had already been 11 years at that point, and nearly 900 units of affordable housing were still missing, specifically because they were going to be built on this platform. So they reached this legal agreement where they said, okay, by May 2025, the end of May 2025, we will finish these apartments, or we will have to pay $2,000 a month per missing unit. So that date came and went, and not only had they not completed the apartments, they hadn't even started, and yet the state's Empire State Development Economic Development Arm agreed to waive the fines. And so 7 or 8 months have passed without collecting those fines, those penalties from Greenland. The new development team, as kind of a sign of good faith, has said, we're going to contribute up to $12 million to this to make up for those penalties. And that money is supposed to go to the city's housing agency to be set aside for other affordable housing projects in surrounding neighborhoods. But so far, they've only submitted a fraction of that, and we will see if they actually make the full $12 million payment over the next couple of years.
A listener texts, this is not affordable housing for most New Yorkers. And I know at the beginning of the segment you were starting to get into it, but residents were concerned about what's deemed affordable in the original Atlantic Yards battles, as you call them. Can you explain the controversy around the term affordable in this housing battle?
Yeah, well, affordable means that rents are capped for people making certain amounts of money. And so that could be very low-income people, people around the federal poverty line or considered pretty low income. It could also mean housing for people considered middle income. Or, I think if you hear people making close to $150,000, you would think that's beyond middle income. That's pretty significant, but maybe not so here in New York City. The original plan had a mix of income levels up to pretty high incomes for tenants. And the housing reserve for the lowest income New Yorkers was supposed to be built in the apartments on top of the rail yard. And so while other buildings were constructed, about 1,300 affordable units were constructed, a lot of the lowest income units never were constructed. And so that some of the controversy here is that people involved in that 2014 agreement say, again, you're promising affordable housing, but it's not the housing that's affordable to the people most in need, who are the lowest income New Yorkers who are getting displaced from the city.
This wasn't just developers making a promise, though. The community had to sue to get these commitments in writing. So what was at stake?
Well, right. I mean, in this agreement that they reached, they sued, they had then threatened to sue in the future if the apartment promises were not fulfilled. As part of the agreement, they said that they would withhold future lawsuits until May 2025, when the apartments were supposed to be built, and they never were. And so that's another reason a lot of community residents and a lot of community groups in Brooklyn are upset. They say, look, we held our fire and you didn't deliver, and now we're starting all over again with different affordability levels, different plans. Step back and say people are also potentially optimistic that a new proposal has more apartments, more buildings, maybe the development team maybe is being a little more straight up and saying, this is expensive. We can't do this without more subsidy from the city and state. We need more money to make this happen. But again, everyone's just skeptical. And can you blame them after 2 decades of broken promises, right up until not collecting penalties from a developer that didn't deliver on a legal agreement?
We have a caller here who founded Brooklyn Speaks, and according to the website, Brooklyn Speaks is an initiative of civic associations, community-based organizations, and advocacy groups concerned about the future of development at the Atlantic Yards site. Assemblymember Joanne Simon, you're on WNYC. Hi.
Hi. Good morning, Amina.
Good morning. Thank you so much for calling in. What would you like to say?
Well, I did want to say that we're pleased that there's something happening here at this site after years of clear, inability to perform. But I think David mentions a number of very important issues, and that is the community really wants to see the site built, but also the affordable units built. And so there are deeply affordable units. There's over 1,000 of them that are due and owing under the original agreement and under the original plan, right? and that those have not been delivered. And so one of the concerns people have is whether or not we will have a commensurate number of really affordable units. And we believe, in fact, that if they're building more, they ought to increase the percentage of those more deeply affordable units.
Thank you so much for your call. David, did you come across some of Brooklyn Speaks and their policy platforms and what they're proposing? Or how do you want to weigh in on the call?
Yeah, well, Brooklyn Speaks is the, I guess, group of community leaders and advocates who had accomplished that 2014 legal agreement. And Assemblymember Simon was part of that then, and she's still very active and engaged. She was just at the most recent kind of community meeting talking with its new development team earlier this month, and she made some of those same points. She said she doesn't want to be left with two towers on that site where there's currently Modell's and P.C. Richards & Sons with higher affordability levels, and still, again, not see those apartments built on top of the rail yard, on top of a platform, because that's kind of secondary now to the effort to build on that site. Makes sense. I mean, it's expensive to build over the rail yard, as we've seen. It's more financially feasible to build on solid grounds. This is a point that the developers made, and so they don't have to build a platform to build on the site of the Modell's. But people are still concerned that, again, that stuff gets prioritized, but what about this affordable housing?
As you're mentioning, the previous developers and even the new ones have cited challenges with building over the active rail yards as a major obstacle to completing this project. So have the new developers found a way to overcome it?
Not yet, I don't think. I mean, the former company Greenland had started to do some of the work to kind of shore up foundations there, and they spent hundreds of millions of dollars to do it, but they still weren't able to accomplish it. And then interest rates rose, other costs have risen, so it makes it even more financially complicated. What the new development team has said, and a lot of these plans are still early stages, so even like unit counts and affordability levels are still in flux, but they said they want to build these other towers on solid ground, and then that will give them more money to be able to dedicate to building the platform. They also want to see what's available from the city and state in terms of subsidies or low interest financing to make it possible. But I think a lot of this is still being worked out.
If you're just joining us, my guest is WNYC and Gothamist housing reporter David Brand. We're talking about some new movement on a plan to build housing in the Atlantic Yards neighborhood near Barclays Center in Brooklyn, and why those plans are now seeing some new movement after being stalled for many years. We can take a few more of your questions or comments at 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. Call or text. Let's go to another call. John in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC. Hi, John.
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my call. I appreciate the comments that people are making about this. The point I wanted to make is based on, being a long-term Brooklyn resident. In the early 2000s, Bill de Blasio was running for, I believe, public advocate, and before he ran for mayor. And I ran into him in Grand Army Plaza and said, well, what's your position on the Atlantic Yards? And he said, well, I support it because they're going to build public housing. Affordable housing. I said, yeah, right. Okay, I understand that, but so my point is that the politicians let this happen. The review of, let's say, the platform, building on the platform over the train tracks, that should have been evaluated, and they should have come up with a feasibility to do that. But the larger point is that every mayor in New York City's history has been in bed with the real estate industry, and they have not been able to get elected without their support. So the people have to be aware of that. And thank goodness we have Mamdani coming in. No one can fool him about, the power of real estate. But but still the people overall have to be aware of the level. And I'm not saying it's corruption. It's like they just make a deal. They get contributions from real estate. And it can't go on because we need housing for regular people, not just millionaires. And, I live in Park Slope, and, the apartments around here are going for $2 million. Houses are going for, $6 and $8 and $12 million. So it's got to stop. Thank you for
John, thank you so much for your call. David, what was coming up for you? You were nodding as John was speaking.
Well, I think John makes a really important point here, because what the saga here isn't just about developers failing to deliver on affordable housing and making pledges that, they ultimately didn't keep. It also is about accountability. And you look back at that 2014 agreement, a legally binding agreement to complete these units. It became clear years ago that these units weren't going to be constructed, but the Empire State Development kind of almost pretended like, yeah, we might impose these penalties for this failure. And then at the very end, right before the deadline, we got the scoop that, they're actually not going to impose these penalties. And so I talked with people involved in Brooklyn Speaks, other community leaders at the time, and the quote that really stands out to me is from Michelle De La Uz. She's director of Brooklyn's Fifth Avenue Committee. And she was like, this is what makes people cynical about government, because these promises weren't upheld and there was really no accountability for the failure. And I think to John's point, he's saying, look at politicians, same old politicians in bed with real estate. They don't hold their feet to the fire. That you don't get the promises that were made. And going back to even to 2003, there was a notion among a lot of residents there that a lot of these promises would never be made, and that they were just kind of being dangled to make it more kind of politically palatable and say, no, we're going to build this and we're going to include affordable housing. But then they didn't. I would say also, the landscape has shifted. There's more of an acknowledgement that we need a lot of housing at all different income levels. So it's encouraging that this project is going to have even more apartments. But then it comes back to, people have lost faith in this project, and they're going to have to see some actual results to believe again.
So what happened to the original developer, Greenland USA, for this project? You report they owed $1.75 million in monthly penalties for missing the deadline. Did they ever pay any of that?
No, they didn't. And so they took over the project from Ratner in 2014, and they were still bound to the same agreement. They revised some of the plans, but ultimately bound by the original terms. And they went bankrupt. They couldn't pay back their investors. So that meant they couldn't complete the housing, couldn't complete the platform. Yet they are still involved in this project. They still retain ownership of that lot that's catty corner to Barclays Center with Modell's and P.C. Richards and Sons. So they are still involved, and that came up at a community meeting recently. And the new developers are called Elcor and Cirrus. Their principals said, well, they are still involved, but they may never make money from this. They will be the last company that gets any profits that we see from these projects. So I will see about that.
Can you talk about this process of building affordable housing? How does it work, and what's the role of Empire State Development? Why does the state control land use review instead of the city?
Sure. It's complicated. In New York City, most new development projects have to go through a land use process to rezone them for larger development or bigger buildings. And if they accomplish that, one of the conditions is that they have to set aside about a quarter of the new apartments, make them income restricted, affordable housing for lower or middle income renters. This project, because it was so complicated, I think such a political minefield, went through a separate process called the General Project Plan, where Empire State Development, the state agency, allows them to circumvent the city's typical land use review process. And so the community doesn't have as much of a say in the project, because in contrast, I guess, to the city land use review process, there's a lot of milestones that developers and the city have to hit. You need, opinion from the community board, from a borough president, from the community at public hearings, and ultimately from the city council. This project skirted that. And so the binding agreement that they reached was that legal agreement to create the affordable housing.
As we run out of time, I want to ask you, why has Atlantic Yards become a cautionary tale for other New York City neighborhoods? And what does the saga reveal about developing affordable housing in the city?
Well, I think it's become kind of a cautionary tale around these kinds of state-led general project plan projects. And most recently, we're seeing that with the Brooklyn Marine Terminal Plan. And that's a proposal to develop thousands of new apartments in buildings along the waterfront just south of Brooklyn Bridge Park. Again, it's circumventing the city's traditional land use review process. So people are skeptical and they say, well, look at what happens in Atlantic Yards. And that's kind of the ultimate result of a failure like this, is that it kind of really affects people's confidence in future projects.
And what comes next for this project? When will we see the construction begin if this proposal is adopted by the community?
Well, it'll still be a few years before construction begins. Right now, they're doing a series of public hearings. There was just one on Monday at the Barclays Center. They were talking about some of like the retail needs and also open space needs for the area. There's going to be a few more, and then they will, I think, finalize some of the actual plans and release some of those and maybe find out what money is available from the city and state. And then we'll get a clearer picture of how many units there will be, where the building, how big the buildings will be, and just how affordable the apartments are going to be.
More to be seen. We'll have to leave it there for now with WNYC and Gothamist housing reporter David Brand. David, thanks for the updates.
Thanks for having me.